evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. We have learned a remarkable amount from the Harvey Weinstein scandal so far. The most powerful man in Hollywood was a serial predator. The press assigned to cover him instead covered up for him. Self-appointed guardians of women looked the other way, in some cases in exchange for cash. The corruption was total and complete. NBC's role is especially shocking. Executives at NBC News knew exactly what Harvey Weinstein was doing nearly a year ago. And yet instead of reporting it, they did their best to keep that information hidden from public view. Thanks to the legwork of their former anchor Ronan Farrow, NBC had taped interviews with a number of Weinstein's victims. They even had Weinstein himself confessing to groping a model, caught on audio tape during an NYPD sting operation. NBC had Harvey Weinstein cold, busted. No honest editor in America would have passed on that story, and yet NBC News chief Noah Oppenheim did pass. He claimed there still wasn't enough evidence to run, so the network killed it. NBC standards for what is news have changed quite a bit in a short period. Just a year ago, that network leaked the now famous Access Hollywood tape to the Washington Post on the eve of a presidential debate, apparently hoping to influence the outcome. NBC could not air that tape itself due to legal concerns, but its executives had no qualms about secretly passing that story to another news outlet and then repeatedly lying about it. Noah Oppenheim may have been at the center of that scandal as well. David Fahrenthold, the Washington Post reporter who somehow wound up with the Access Hollywood tape, was Noah Oppenheim's classmate in college at Harvard. They worked together on the school newspaper. Reportedly, they were friends. Now, NBC News executives have never explained how that tape, which was their company's proprietary property, got from NBC's offices to David Fahrenthold at the Washington Post. And they're still not saying. But you wouldn't be crazy to connect the dots. And by the way, and it may or may not be relevant, Noah Oppenheim was a groomsman in Chelsea Clinton's wedding. By the way, NBC called us within the past hour denying Noah Oppenheim leaked that tape. Take that for what you will. But NBC is not the only discredited figure in this saga. Celebrity lawyer Lisa Bloom sells herself as a fiery champion of the oppressed. Bloom once sued the Catholic Church over its sex abuse scandal. She sued the Boy Scouts because at the time they didn't admit girls. She represented one of Bill Cosby's accusers and 3 women who said Bill O'Reilly sexually harassed them. She's on television all the time, the Al Sharpton of the feminist movement. Yet in the case of Harvey Weinstein, Lisa Bloom took the side of the predator over the prey, likely because the price was right. In the original New York Times piece exposing Weinstein's behavior, Bloom appears as Weinstein's attorney, advisor, confidant, explainer-in-chief. She tried to explain away his behavior as the fumblings of a confused relic from an earlier age. In her words, an old dinosaur learning new ways. According to Lisa Bloom, Weinstein didn't realize that groping terrified women might be perceived as, quote, intimidating. Well, within days, the public outcry over Weinstein's crimes became so intense that Lisa Bloom, sensing diminishing returns, fled the scene. She began denouncing Weinstein herself. She really had no idea how bad Harvey was, she said. Right. But now new reports indicate that Lisa Bloom's PR campaign for Harvey Weinstein may have gone well beyond spin into something much darker. In a Facebook post over the weekend, actress Rose McGowan, who says Harvey Weinstein raped her, accused Lisa Bloom of something approaching bribery. McGowan says Bloom contacted her and offered secret payments if she would recant and declare Harvey Weinstein a changed man. Lisa Bloom denies this. Are her denials believable? We'll let you decide. But before you do decide, consider a long and well-sourced piece in the Columbia Journalism Review this weekend accuses Lisa Bloom of similar behavior in yet another sexual harassment case. This is of an Amazon Entertainment executive recently fired for propositioning a colleague. As in the case of Harvey Weinstein, Lisa Bloom was paid to provide moral cover for a man accused of predatory misdeeds against women. His career in jeopardy, he hired Lisa Bloom to explain away his problems. And because she's precisely that kind of feminist for hire, Lisa Bloom took the job. Joining us now, radio talk show host Mark Simone. Mark, thanks for joining us tonight. So there are reports that Lisa Bloom had a business relationship with Harvey Weinstein that went beyond your lawyer-client relationship, that he was working to develop a project based on a book she wrote. Have you heard any indication she plans to give that money back
Well, it's like, remember Hillary Clinton said when asked about giving the donation back, she said there's nobody to give it back to. So she may use the same excuse. You know, how do you know when you hit rock bottom? When your own company fires you, when your company has to change the name, when the Academy throws you out? I think it's when Lisa Bloom has to leave because you're hurting her reputation. That is it. So,
but I mean, I agree with you completely about Lisa Bloom, and I've watched this for years, and she's for hire. She's, you know, someone who has no moral authority, from what I can tell, and yet she is taken seriously by virtually every news outlet out there as a voice of authority on the abuse of women, as a moral voice. How unethical is it to be working on a development deal with the guy you're representing in a sexual harassment case?
Well, it's the worst thing you could ever do. And I never saw anybody, except for Harvey Weinstein, destroy their brand so fast. How would anybody go to her again? When she was first involved, I assumed he hired her just to neutralize her. If you hire an attorney, they can never come against you from the other side. But it turns out she's been on this for a long time. Rose McGowan says she was offered $6 million. That's an amazing amount of money. That's how seriously they took this. Harvey is famous for years for offering editors, whoever, screen deals, development deals. Noel Oppenheim, am I not mistaken that he's a screenwriter who probably might be looking for a deal?
Who has said that he's had no business relationship with Harvey Weinstein?
Well, but NBC Universal, for years, Universal has been distributing Harvey Weinstein's films. Weinstein produces television for NBC, like Project Runway. And think about this. They ran 1,000 Trump stories based on anonymous sources. Ronan Farrow came in with a police report, police audio, 3 witnesses on camera, and they said, you haven't nailed it down yet. And I mean, the double standard is ridiculous.
So here's what I don't understand. NBC has never explained how its property, the Access Hollywood tape, which was shot more than a decade before, wound up moving from NBC's offices to the Washington Post. They've never explained. They're going to do an investigation. We don't know the answer. Last month, you saw one of the anchors on MSNBC said some unattractive things in a commercial break. The tape was leaked. NBC immediately found the producer responsible for leaking it and fired him. Why can't they find out how that tape got from their offices to the Washington Post?
Well, it's being run kind of the same as O.J.'s hunt for the real killers. It's not got a lot of manpower on this investigation, but they'll never let up until they find it.
It's not an all-hands-on-deck situation, is it? Mark Simone,
No.
Thank you for that summary. Good to see you.
Thanks.
The personal implications of the Weinstein scandal are bad enough, but the business implications continue to grow as well. Tomorrow, the Weinstein Company is holding a board meeting, and there's increasing evidence the company is in danger of outright collapse. For the latest on that, we're joined by Deadline.com's Dominic Patton, who's been on top of every detail in the story from day one. Dominic, what do you know?
Well, I mean, Tucker, what we're going to see happen tomorrow, let's jump back up a little bit to a couple of hours today. After being kicked out of the Movie Academy on the weekend, the people behind the Oscars, Harvey Weinstein today was essentially the first step of being kicked out of the Producers Guild of America, which for an Oscar-winning producer is basically kicked to the curb. Now, he has 10 days to respond, plea his case, but honestly, with this board meeting that's happening tomorrow in New York City, which he will be phoning in from rehab, which I'm sure is quite nice, and his heavyweight lawyer, Hollywood lawyer Patty Glazer will be representing him. They're really going to go to war about was he correctly terminated from the Weinstein Company on October 8th. And that was, of course, 3 days after the New York Times expose came out and just before the New Yorker expose came out.
So there have been a number of reports that all of this it grew out of an internecine battle between Harvey Weinstein and his brother Bob. Are those reports accurate, do you know?
Well, I would say that those reports, I mean, look, that Bob Weinstein has essentially said that he and his brother divorced about 5 years ago. Bob went to run Dimension Films, which is actually a very profitable arm of the Weinstein Company. But here's what's interesting. There's been lots of talk about is it for sale, is it not for sale? Bob Weinstein put out a statement late last week saying it's not for sale. Today, Colony Capital, the people who are, it's run by Tom Barrack, a good friend of the president's actually. Colony Capital said they are injecting a ton of cash into the Weinstein Company, and we hear they're looking at buying up some of the assets for basically what would be a fire sale. Very similar to what they did to Bob and Harvey's previous company, Miramax, back in 2010. Now, here's the other thing to add to that. You take with that, this meeting, Harvey owns 23% of the Weinstein Company. So what I really think is going to happen tomorrow in this meeting that he'll be phoning into is they're either going to determine whether or not he's going to get a payout or whether or not he's going to try to rethrone himself. The thing is, what is there to come back to, and what is there worth coming back to? Colony Capital could be the ones holding all the cards here if they decide that they want to grab the Weinstein Company assets and try the best they can with what's remaining for what's essentially a crippled company.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no branding expert, but it strikes me as unlikely it remains the Weinstein Company for long, right?
What? I mean, Tucker, you said it, and your previous guest said it very well. Have you ever seen a brand implode as fast as the Weinstein Company and Harvey Weinstein? Remember, it's less than 2 weeks ago the New York Times broke their story. Just over a week ago that we got the story from the New Yorker. Dozens and dozens of women. You talked about Lisa Bloom and Rose McGowan. There, of course, is Ashley Judd. The likes of Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie have come out. This is evolving and evolving. And I'll tell you something else that your viewers might be interested in. We've already seen the Movie Academy. We've already seen the Producers Guild. We're here talked at the TV Academy, because, of course, Weinstein produced a lot of shows like Project Runway, that they, too, are now seriously looking into tossing him out. So, really, he's a producer without a home, a producer without a company, and a reputation that's in the toilet.
Nicely put. Dominic, thank you for that update. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Harvey Weinstein gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to politicians and to the Clinton Foundation over the years. In a statement today, the Clinton Foundation announced that it is not returning the money. It's refusing, saying that money was spent a long time ago on what it called, apparently without irony, charitable efforts. It's not the only time Weinstein has given big to the Clinton family. Almost 20 years ago, Weinstein was one of only a handful of people who donated the maximum to Bill Clinton's legal defense fund during the Monica Lewinsky impeachment scandal. Peter Schweitzer, well situated to comment. He wrote the book Clinton Cash, and he joins us tonight. Peter, it seems to me there's a cost in not returning the money. If you're Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, who spent a better part of a week not responding to your old friend's sexual harassment scandal, why wouldn't you just give the money to some virtuous charity and call it a day? Why would you refuse?
That's a great question, Tucker. I mean, look, they're kind of in a pickle, the Clintons. This is not a relationship with a celebrity or a Hollywood person that was sort of a flash in the pan. As you pointed out, they've known each other. They've had financial connections going on for 20 years. And Weinstein, had an interview with Bill Clinton in 2012 on CNN in which he talks about the fact that they're friends and that he considered Bill Clinton a mentor. Weinstein is not what you'd call a modest person. So if he's saying that, he probably really means it. So the Clintons are in a tough spot. But, that said, there really is no other choice other than for them to give this donation to someone else. I'm not buying that this was spent well to help other people. There was an internal review done of the Clinton Foundation that Chelsea Clinton ordered. They asked Clinton employees of the foundation to rate the effectiveness of the charity on a scale from 1 to 10. The average score was a 4. Some of them gave it a 1. So Clinton Foundation employees don't consider the foundation very effective, and we know that money was probably not spent in a very effective way.
Yeah, and those were not right-wing partisans, presumably. I mean, my understanding was the Clinton Foundation doesn't do a lot of actual helping of people. It convenes conferences where rich people gather to talk about helping people. But you got to wonder if its finances aren't a little tight right now. They don't have anything to sell because the Clintons no longer have positions of power. How is their fundraising going? Do we know?
Well, it's not going great based on public reports. They had, two arms of this, the Clinton Foundation and then, of course, the Clinton Global Initiative, CGI. Right. CGI shut down after the 2016 election. It no longer exists. And that was really the central marketplace for influence peddling. Clinton Foundation's tried to position itself in a different way. They tried to amass an endowment over the last couple of years, so they've probably got $150 million parked away, so they could certainly give this money to someone else. They have it. But the long-term and medium-term prospects are not good. They don't have access to sell. As that same Chelsea Clinton review pointed out, in internal review, that a lot of the high-dollar donors were expecting quid pro quos. And if you don't have anything to sell, people are just not going to give money to your organization. And that's precisely the problem the Clintons are running into.
That's exactly right. Why would the Sultan of Oman or the royal family of Abu Dhabi give you anything? You know what I mean? It's like the least efficient way to spend money. Peter Schweitzer, thank you for your deep reservoir of Clinton knowledge. Well, there are new mysteries in the Las Vegas investigation, a lot of them. Geraldo Rivera joining us next with the latest.
Tucker Carlson is brought to
It's now been 2 full weeks since the shooting massacre in Las Vegas. Wars have been fought and won in less time, literally. Yet even now, investigators are still trying to understand why Stephen Paddock murdered 59 people, how he was able to do it. Basic questions remain unanswered. Mysteries multiply by the day. For example, security guard Jesus Campos was apparently the first man at the scene of the shooting. Initially, he was reported to have disrupted the shooting spree, possibly saved many lives. That was widely reported. Then it emerged that Campos was actually the first victim of the attack and was shot, or perhaps wounded by a ricochet, even that's not clear, before Paddock targeted the concert goers. That's the case under the current timeline anyway, which could end up changing again. We don't know for sure, partly because we can't talk to Campos because he's disappeared. He scheduled an appearance on Hannity and a couple of other news programs late last week, then didn't show up. A union representative says he may have checked into a walk-in health clinic instead. Every walk-in health clinic contacted in Las Vegas said, "We've never heard of this man. Now he's gone. Where is he? Nobody knows." Most people don't seem to care, which may be even weirder. For the latest developments, Fox correspondent Geraldo Rivera, who's covered an awful lot of stories like this, joins us tonight. Geraldo, it's almost not even obvious where to begin, but let's just start with Campos. It's not clear to me whether he was shot or wounded by a ricochet, not that it matters, but it's just it's another example of the bad reporting that's clouded the facts of this case from the beginning. But the fact that we don't know where he is strikes me as very odd.
Well, I think that in the Campos situation, I would submit that it is probably a function of his employer, the Mandalay Bay Resort, that is keeping him out of contact with the outside world for fear of incurring civil liability. Right. If it can be shown that as a security guard or the security apparatus within the hotel generally failed to prevent this awful tragedy, and is there any liability on the hotel's part? And I think that timing will play a role in that. But the bigger picture
let me just say, I would agree with you there, except for the union rep, who you'd think Campos would talk to as much as he would talk to his employer, has said, we're actively searching for the guy, and it is the union. Unions are strong in Las Vegas still, as you know. He says we have no idea where this guy is. It's a little strange.
Well, I think that what the tone of your voice implies is that you are skeptical of the official accounts of what happened that
I honestly don't know what to think.
Night.
I mean, I'm skeptical of everything, but I'm sincerely confused. I don't have a secret theory that I'm pushing.
But there are two things. There is the lack of an obvious motive. Why did this Stephen Paddock, a 64-year-old millionaire by all accounts, why did he suddenly become this evil killing machine? So there's no motive. I've heard, he was ISIS, he was Antifa, he was the Illuminati, he was a satanic blood cultist. So that the lack of motive plus the confused timeline allows us to ponder, and as talk radio and the conspiracy theorists get their hands on it, it becomes a lot like, in a sense, although the crimes are obviously so very different, it becomes like the Kennedy assassination in the sense that we have evidence that seemingly contradicts the official account. Therefore, we're skeptical. There are dark forces at work here, playing with the facts and the circumstances to make a political goal. This is a false flag operation to bring on gun control, et cetera, et cetera. I think, I just tell you what I think, I thank you for crediting me with my deep experience in these kinds of crimes. I think that because of the enormity of this act and the murders committed and the extraordinary circumstance of the 32nd floor of the hotel becoming the sniper's nest where they could rain down death and destruction on so many just average, normal, ordinary Americans. We run wild. We don't want it to be the banality of a simple, horrible, evil creature like Lee Harvey Oswald.
That's not true. Here's what we don't want. We don't want to believe that our authorities are incompetent. And I don't want to believe that. People come to this country precisely because they think our authorities are competent. And our justice system is on the level, and our law enforcement knows what it's doing.
I think
they're revealing themselves. Look, they left his house unguarded. This Campos guy, I'm not suggesting he did anything wrong. I am suggesting if you want to get the timeline right, you better talk to him. The authorities don't seem to know where he is. They revised the basic facts of the timeline like 3 times. Why should I have faith in their account?
Well, why doubt someone like Lombardo, the sheriff, who seems such a straight shooter to me? I mean, no one has ever dealt with a crime of this magnitude. This is the worst mass murder ever in American history. And it's suddenly thrust on the Las Vegas sheriff to lead the investigation. Now, he's got all the feds and the state guys and everyone's behind him, and it's all coming to this fulcrum, this sheriff. So, I mean, I think he's just out of his depth in the sense that he's a sincere, honest person, but he just doesn't give me the vibe.
Well, look, I'm not saying he's a bad person, and I'm not saying he's lying. It's never even crossed my mind. I don't think he has some weird agenda. I just think he seems like he doesn't know what he's doing, and that rocks my faith. And by the way, it leaves space for the conspiracy people, because, like, if the official account isn't credible, conspiracy theories fill the void. That's my view.
I think the official account is credible. I think there was great confusion. Right. I think that with Jesus Campos particularly, no one knew exactly when he got wounded. They didn't have the transcripts of the radio communications. It's not clear at what point after he went on his walkie-talkie and said, call the cops, there's a shooter up here. How long did it take them to actually dial 911? How long did it take for the deputies? And because the carnage is so awful.
Right. No, I get it. It's bad,
so
but
bad. We want it to be the commies. We want it to be the aliens.
Well, we don't know what it is. Thanks to them. Anyway, thank you, Geraldo. Thanks for joining us.
Stephen Pollack.
You're right. Up next, new immigration numbers prove America is changing faster than you thought it was. We'll have those numbers for you after the break. Well, the essential makeup of this country is changing rapidly in the face of massive immigration over the past 50 years. How quickly is it changing? Well, a new report from the Center for Immigration Studies finds that as of last year, America contains 43.7 million immigrants. That's an increase of nearly 13 million since the year 2000. Since 2000, you remember 2000, not that long ago, 13 million new immigrants. Immigrants are now 13.5% of the population. That's the highest figure in more than a century. You may like it, you may dislike it, but it's a big deal. Stephen Camarata, Director of Research at the Center for Immigration Studies, he wrote that new report, and he joins us now. The first question is an obvious one, which is, no matter where you are on immigration, this is a massive deal. It's changing the country at the most basic level, and yet I don't ever see this reported anywhere. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, most of this immigration is legal. And remember, it's not the weather. It's something we can control. The immigrant population, you just ran through some of the numbers. Let me give you maybe with some more. The immigrant population has doubled since 1990, tripled since 1980, and quadrupled since 1970. Again, it's mostly legal. Illegal is in there, too, but it's mostly legal immigration. And we don't have the kind of national debate about this that we probably should. The impact is enormous. Let me just give you one. 1/3 of all the children in poverty today in America live in an immigrant household. About half of immigrant households receive some form of welfare. But again, we're not getting much discussion. All we ever get is, well, we have illegal immigration. Should we amnesty them? Should we not? But the bigger question of what number of people can we assimilate and what makes sense for our country is seldom ever asked.
And even more rarely asked is, what does the public want? It's their country. It belongs to American citizens. I don't see them being notified about this.
Right. In general, surveys show that the public likes the immigrants that they know, but they mostly think that the level is too high and that a lower level would help with incorporation of the immigrants, assimilation, and so forth. And I think so the public, on the one hand, likes the individuals but wants less immigration. But there are very few politicians who actually articulate that point of view.
That's how I feel personally. I've met very few immigrants I don't like. They're mostly great. But that doesn't mean that the policy itself makes sense. Quickly, what does this mean for our population going forward?
Yeah, very roughly, over the next 50 years, immigration is going to add maybe 100 or 105 million new people above what it would otherwise be without immigration. So that's roughly equal to
100 million?
Yeah, a little over 100 million. So that's roughly equal to the population of Great Britain and Canada together. All the projections show it. Census, Pew, my own, everybody kind of agrees about 100 million.
So out of a country of 320, that's a totally different country.
Right. It's adding a whole third to the population of what we currently have. And that has implications for the environment and traffic and congestion and pollution and sprawl. But again, very little discussion of just these basic numbers, which really are not in dispute.
No discussion. I mean, none that I ever hear. That's weird. You don't see it. Stephen, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Nice to have some facts. Well, for reaction to these new numbers, we're joined now by Fox analyst and co-host of The Five, our old friend Juan Williams. Juan, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So I think Stephen Camarota summed it up well when he said, of the American public, most people really like immigrants. That's certainly how I feel. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever met one I didn't like, actually. They're hard workers. They kind of buy into America. They're great. But the macro question remains unanswered, which is, what's the effect on the population here? You can't switch out your population to this degree and not have some kind of social volatility. Why does the average person not get to weigh in on this very often, do you think?
Well, I think we do get to weigh in. I remember, you go back to 1965, they had a change in terms of the Immigration Act that changed the premise of it, and I think made it more about family reunification, bringing families together. And then you have the argument in the current context, I think, especially after last year's campaign, Tucker, where there's sort of a populist tribal instinct that says, wait a second, these people are coming in and it's a zero-sum game. They may be taking jobs, they may be driving wages down, but what we've seen from studies is that long-term, in fact, they generate economic activity, create jobs, and then you have people held up like, Sergey Brin at Google, or remember Steve Jobs
That's not
at
a
Apple.
serious economic point. I mean, nobody argues with real data that our current immigration policy is a net boon to the economy.
Oh, yeah, they do.
If it were, California wouldn't have, with the most immigrants in the country, the most people in poverty, which it now does. California is far poorer than it was when I grew up there, and there's only one reason: immigration. So that's not really a point.
No, wait a second. I'm interested in hearing you on this, because California, first of all, their economy is doing pretty good. You said a high level of people who are impoverished, and they have a very high immigrant population. As you just heard from Stephen, a high percentage of children in our country who live in poverty are in immigrant families. That means they're at the lowest level of income. They're competing at the lowest level.
Exactly.
And they're doing everything they can to get a foothold in our society. It doesn't mean that it's a negative in terms of the American economy, though.
Right. Well, that's, I don't think you're making the point with respect, but let me ask you a bigger question here. So we're at a moment, and every survey shows it, of total division within our society. People have less in common with each other than they've ever had. Yeah. And we're asking basic questions like, what ties us all together? Why are we all in this together? Do you not see any correlation between massive immigration since 1965 and where we are now? The country much less united, much less willing to agree on basic questions like, is the Bill of Rights worth continuing? Things like that. That's not related to immigration? Of course it is.
Wow,
that's a huge cause.
I don't know anybody who's challenging the Bill of Rights. I mean, to me...
The entire left. The First Amendment has been invalidated on college campuses. I do this every night. Trust me.
No, okay, I know. I watch it. But I'm going to say, I think, in fact, what the key here, and I feel like I'm reiterating something Stephen said earlier, is assimilation. Do you share American values? Do you believe, in God-given rights and democracy and representation and law and order? That's the key. But it's not about, at this point, a sort of tribal fight between native-born Americans and immigrants.
So if we're trying to tell immigrants that law and order is a core American value, which it is a core Western value, what is the message we send with, say, sanctuary cities or the Dreamers? Aren't we telling them in the clearest possible terms that when it's politically inexpedient, we ignore the law? That's exactly the message we're sending to our newest immigrants. You have a right to be here illegally. That's what the left is telling them every day. That's the law and order you hope to inculcate in our immigrant population?
Well, I don't see it as the left. I'm listening to you because when I hear from the Chamber of Commerce, when I hear from the Sheriff's Association...
Yeah, they're for it too. You're right.
Oh, so that's who I'm here. That's not the left,
right.
Tucker. That's
no, but
not
when Nancy,
the left.
That's a fair point, and a point that I often make on the show. Business interests and the radical social left are aligned on this. But when Nancy Pelosi congratulates Dreamers for coming here illegally and says thank you for breaking the law that the Congress, which she's in, passed, does that send a law and order message, do you think, to immigrants?
No, but the key here is, and I think this is the reason the sheriffs are on it, say, we want law and order, we want you to talk to police, cooperate with police, respect the police, so we don't want you to see us as coming at, so that's a larger conversation. But my point to you is assimilation is absolutely central to bringing immigrants in if this is going to be successful. So far, look at where the Wall Street is right now. Look at our economy. Our economy is not suffering because of immigrants.
No, and for the affluent. I mean, it's cheap household labor. That's why they love it. They love it. No one loves it more than rich people. It's just the middle class getting shafted, as you know. Juan, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, has radicalization on the left created a permanent culture war? Our next guest says, yes, it has, and that's the whole point. Stay tuned. Americans are, of course, divided in how they vote, always have been, though increasingly they're divided on pretty much everything else as well. Some are blockbusters, professional sports, even what you eat for dinner, who you date, all now political battlefields. Writing over at The Federalist, John Daniel Davidson says both sides of the political divide are radicalizing, but the radicalization on the left is more dangerous, more prone to violence, more likely to cause a culture war that is, quote, going to encompass everything, and that will never end. John Daniel Davidson joins us tonight. John, thanks for coming on. So the core of your piece is a response to a new Pew poll on polarization in American life. So give us the quick overview of how deep these divides are.
Sure. The Pew poll is a series of 10 questions that the Pew Research Center has been asking Americans for a number of years, going back to 1994. And what they found is over time, the medians, the average answers that Republicans and Democrats will agree to, different statements, have moved farther and farther to the extreme. So what used to be a very common middle ground has now moved out to the edges, and the numbers of things that Americans agree on is fewer and fewer, and the gaps between the two groups is widening. And you can kind of see, it's fascinating to see it over time. You know, from 1994 to 2004, it was more or less the same, and from 2004 to 2017, boy, it's changed a lot, and it really represents the divisions that we see everywhere now in American society.
So to sum it up in a kind of blunt way, conservatives seem annoyed by liberals. Liberals seem at total war with conservatives. So you have this amazing quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a writer, not a very fluent writer, but something of a moral leader now on the left. And he's got a new book out, I think last week, about race. And you quote an interview that he did with Ezra Klein over at Vox, where Klein asks him, you know, how can we get rid of white supremacy? Characterize the answer he gave.
He more or less said that he didn't think that we could get rid of white supremacy without something like the French Revolution. And this is something that he does a lot. He kind of feints toward violence and then backs off, right? But the implication is clear that he thinks America is an endemically white supremacist country that is irredeemably racist, and that the only thing that will reform the racism of America is a kind of a violent revolution and upheaval. He never comes out and says it, but he implies it everywhere.
For our viewers who don't believe it, it's worth, and his speaking and writing styles are so hard to take that I'm not going to inflict them on our viewers, but it's worth actually reading. But I guess what was so striking about this is a guy who won the MacArthur Genius Award, I think, who's really feted by this, you know, the intellectual left as a deeply serious person, someone to listen to, someone whose words are indispensable, and he's suggesting that blood may be the only way to atone for America's sins. That seems a different level to me.
It is a different level, Tucker, but all of this comes down to a fundamental question. Is the Declaration of Independence true or not? And you know, is America good or bad? And the problem with the left, and the reason that the left's radicalization is more dangerous than radicalization among Republicans, is that the left answers that question, no, the Declaration of Independence is not true. It's a cynical document. No, America's not a good place. It's not a place where we can get along as a big, diverse group of people. It's a zero-sum game of political tribalism. That's the fundamental difference between left and right. And the left increasingly has concluded that they can't share a country with people that disagree with them.
Well, you know, those are the mathematics of identity politics right there. Nicely put. Terrifying, too. John, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, an economist said that all married people should be punished because some groups in America don't get married as often. Huh. It's called feminist economics. That's next. Well, there are thousands and thousands of economists out there, not all of them competent, so of course there are just about as many economic schools. Keynesianism, Marxism, neoliberalism, the Austrian school. Now we have something called feminist economics. Studies have shown that marriage is one of this country's most potent anti-poverty weapons, so it's not surprising the government encourages marriage with various benefits, including those emanating from the tax code. It's been that way for a long time. But Michelle Holder, an assistant professor at economics at John Jay College in New York City, says those benefits ought to be abolished because certain groups have low marriage rates, and it's wrong to express preference for something not shared across the board. Michelle Jawando is vice president of legal progress at the Center for American Progress, and she joins us today. Michelle, it's great to see you.
Hi, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
So feminist economics, I've never heard of that. I didn't know that feminism could be applied to science. Is there like feminist thermodynamics? Is there a feminist view of gravity? Like what does feminism have to do with this?
Sure there is. I mean, essentially what we are thinking about is how do we put different views in place, right? And so we talk about economics, but we don't often think about all of the views that should be represented. And actually at our event, what we were really trying to think about is, are we meeting the needs of all families today?
Okay, but you're not suggesting that like the actual, I mean, economics is not, I'm joking, is not real science. It's like made up, it's like psychology. A lot of it's just totally made up. But you're not suggesting that feminism could be applied to the hard side. Like, is there a feminist biology? Is there a feminist theory of gravity that's different?
I think we're focusing on kind of the term as opposed to really looking at the issues. Yeah, no, that's fine.
So the question of marriage, I mean, I don't really think anyone disputes that when people are married, they're far less likely to be in poverty. In fact, it's the single most consistent marker for being in poverty is a broken family. So why would you in any way want to encourage that?
So I think marriage is great. I've been married to my very good-looking husband for 11 years, and I hope we have 50 more. But I think what we are really trying to look at is, are we doing the things necessary? Do we have policies to support all families? The reality is there are about 8 million grandparents in this country today who are raising or helping with their grandchildren under the age of 18. We have about 26% of families are led by single mothers who are raising children. And do we have policies to support all families?
Let me ask you a question. Do you see that as good or bad? If a quarter of all families are led by single mothers, I think an honesty policymaker would say that's a disaster. That's the beginning of the end of our society, and it has really obvious consequences like higher imprisonment rates, lower high school graduation rates, more malnutrition, more poverty. Those are really kind of beyond debate. So when you see that number, does it make you sad, or do you think that's okay?
Well, what I think is that we don't look at the reality of how families are composed today. So let's think about this. 64% of mothers are breadwinners, okay? About 42% are the sole or primary. But yet we don't have policies in place like paid family medical leave or adequate child care. So how are we really talking about caring about families if we don't look at all of the needs of families?
By the way, I'm not in any way for excluding anybody or being mean to people,
and neither are
judging them.
Right.
But as a matter of social policy, which is what we're talking about, and the tax code is part of our social policy.
Correct.
Can we start it on the same baseline? Can we acknowledge that when the majority of kids in a community are born out of wedlock, that is an unequivocal disaster? That's not good in any way.
Well, I think what we should.
Do you
I
agree
think
with that?
what we should say is that all families deserve to have support.
Right. Okay.
Right?
No, but that's a bumper sticker. Let's get to the core issue, which is something that wasn't the case 50 years ago. In many communities, the majority of children, not just black communities, a lot of white communities in poor areas, the majority of kids are born out of wedlock. That is a disaster. Can you say that with me?
So what I can say is that all families deserve to have.
But why wouldn't you? Hold on. But why wouldn't you say that? Since we know that single parenthood leads to these terrible outcomes, why wouldn't you say it was bad?
You can look at Ben Carson, who is your HUD secretary, and he would say that
I grew up in a single parent household for part of my childhood. Look, no, but over time,
I think the fact is, if we have policies that speak to all of our needs, no, it isn't.
You're dodging it because
okay, Tucker. Let's say this.
Is it preferable?
Are we prepared to say that we want to support all families or not?
No, are we prepared to stop with the bumper stickers and the slogans and get to real answers?
That we should support all families.
But what you're doing is being a hack and giving me a fake answer. Support all families.
What I'm saying is the reality of where we were 50 years ago is not where we are today.
Do you think?
So if we are thinking about grandparents,
all right, I give up. I give up.
Don't give up.
This is why nobody takes the left seriously, because this is an actual issue that cuts across races. It cuts across the whole country.
Exactly.
And it's a disaster.
This is not a partisan idea.
But you don't admit it's a disaster
this president
because they vote
and
Democrat.
his daughter saying we have to do something about
Well, they're wrong.
We agree.
They're wrong
we
if
agree.
they don't see this as a
they're
disaster.
wrong that we should do
Trump
something
and his
about
daughter are
childcare
wrong if they
and
don't
paid family
see
medical leave.
single parenthood on the scale we see it now as a social disaster,
Tucker,
because it is.
Tucker, I think we need to say that faith without works. They
All
said
right.
it in James.
All right.
We need to make sure that we're protecting and taking care of all families. Let's do that.
As you know.
Let's
Michelle, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, we have a piece of tape that we were going to wait till Friday to show you, but it was too great. People often say Fox is the strongest name in news. There's another contender for that title. Stay with us, please. So we got you a Christmas present. We thought we can't wait 2.5 months to give it to you, so we're going to give it to you tonight. If you ever wondered what happens behind the scenes on television, here's tape from the CNN Morning Show. Anchor and hero Chris Cuomo showing off one of his many talents. Up there was sword swallowing and fitting a dozen quarters in your nose. You see if you can do that. That's unbelievable. We could mock it. We're not going to. Watch carefully. That's incredible. Allison Camerata is missing it. But you're not. It's so great. You know what? It's so great. We're going to have to show it to you again probably next night. That, unfortunately, is it for us tonight. What a great time it's been. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 and every night. The show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink, Sean Nash.